Operating in high-stakes environments means there is absolutely no margin for error. We bypass the carefully crafted scripts and digital filters to deliver an authentic, unfiltered look into the realities of public service.
Sir, please step away from the car. The manager said you were trying to steal things out of the market.
This is my car. I'm loading groceries.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back, now.
Officer, this is a completely illegal and unlawful arrest. I know my
I said turn around.
The parking lot security camera captured everything. Every word, every movement, every decision. From its fixed position above the light pole outside Crestview Market, it recorded a 75-year-old man loading grocery bags into the trunk of his car and a uniformed officer walking toward him with his hand hovering near his belt. It recorded the moment a simple errand trip turned into an unlawful arrest that would later be replayed in courtrooms, training rooms, and news reports. The footage begins like any other quiet Saturday afternoon. Cars pulling in and out of spaces, carts rattling across the pavement, families heading toward the automatic doors with kids trailing behind. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Just an older black man in a dark overcoat, standing at the rear of his gray sedan, placing bags of groceries into the trunk at a slow, careful pace. That man was Harold Keaton. He did not look like a suspect. He did not act like a suspect. He behaved like what he was, a 75-year-old federal judge running errands on his day off. But for Officer Brent Mallory, that didn't matter. All he needed was a vague accusation and a target that fit the story he had already decided to believe. Mallory steps into frame from the left side of the camera's view. 37 years old, average build, shaved jawline, Crestview Police Department patch on his shoulder. 11 years on the force, known among his colleagues as active, hard-charging, and never afraid to make a stop. His personnel file looks respectable on the surface. Consistent activity, plenty of traffic stops, enough arrests to keep his numbers up. Buried a little deeper are the patterns no one wanted to talk about. Multiple complaints for rude behavior, incidents where citizens said he escalated minor encounters for no reason. At least one sustained finding for discourteous conduct, resolved with a counseling memo and nothing more. A reputation among some residents as the officer who turned routine contact into confrontation. That history isn't written on his face when he appears next to the judge's sedan, but it's there in the way he walks, in the way he squares his shoulders, in the way his voice cuts through the low ambient noise of the lot. "Sir, please step away from the car," he says. "The manager said you were trying to steal things out of the supermarket." The words make no sense if you look at what the camera sees. The trunk is open. The judge is placing bags inside, not removing them. There are no alarms sounding, no store employees chasing anyone, no armfuls of unpaid merchandise, just a man putting purchased items into his own vehicle. Judge Harold Keaton looks up, one hand resting on a bag, the other holding his key fob. He turns slowly to face the officer. His expression isn't angry yet. It's something closer to disbelief. "Steal it?" he says. "This is my car. I'm loading my groceries, the security." Footage has no close-up, but anyone familiar with his career would recognize the calm tone. Before he was Judge Keaton, he was Attorney Keaton, a civil rights lawyer who spent 2 decades arguing unlawful stop and illegal search cases in federal courts. After that, he spent more than 25 years on the bench, ruling on Fourth Amendment violations, police misconduct, and qualified immunity. He wrote opinions that limited officers from doing exactly what Mallory is doing right now. But out here, in a parking lot, none of that is visible. To Mallory, he's just an older black man near a car the store manager thought was too nice for him. Mallory doesn't check the trunk. He doesn't ask for a receipt. He doesn't confirm what the manager actually saw. He moves straight to control. "Please don't make it harder," the officer says. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now." He skips over questions and goes straight to handcuffs. A few people nearby slow down. A woman pushing a stroller stops completely, eyes locked on the scene. A teenager with headphones around his neck hesitates in the crosswalk, turning his head toward the raised voice. A man with a cart full of bottled water pauses halfway to his pickup. No one understands why an officer is talking like this to an elderly man with grocery bags, but they all recognize the tone. This is not a conversation. This is an order. "Officer," Keaton answers, his voice sharper now, "this is a completely illegal and unlawful arrest. I know my rights. I am a federal judge. It's the first time he raises his voice. Not to threaten, not to provoke, but to draw a line. He has spent decades explaining the difference between a lawful detention and an unlawful one. What's happening right now isn't in a gray area. There is no reasonable suspicion of theft. There is no specific articulable fact beyond someone thought you were stealing. If Mallory had been properly trained and properly supervised, this should have been the moment everything paused. A normal officer hears federal judge, takes a breath, and says, "Okay, sir, let me see some ID, we'll clear this up." It doesn't matter whether the person is actually a judge. The claim alone is enough to trigger caution. Mallory doesn't slow down. "I said turn around," he snaps. "You are ignoring my commands, and that's already enough reason for an arrest." He doesn't say what statute that is. He doesn't say what crime ignoring an unjustified order actually is. He simply equates not instantly obeying with grounds for arrest. It's the mentality of someone who sees commands as law, not law as the basis for commands. To the camera, the judge's body language is clear. He's not charging, he's not reaching, he's not trying to flee. He stands with his shoulders back, hands visible, eyes moving between the officer and the security camera domes on the poles. In disbelief, he says, "You have no probable cause. You are violating my rights on that camera right there." He turns his head and points his hand up toward the lens that's recording him. It's a small gesture, but it tells you everything about him. He knows the law. He knows the importance of video. He knows exactly how this footage will look when lawyers freeze it frame by frame. Mallory doesn't adjust. He doesn't de-escalate. He lunges in and grabs the judge's arm. "Hey, stop resisting!" he shouts. There is no resistance on the video, no pulling away, no shoving, nothing that resembles a physical struggle. There is only an officer putting his hands on an elderly man and yelling words that will later appear in his report as justification. Around them, phones finally come up. The teenager in the crosswalk is now standing still, recording. The woman with the stroller has her phone out in one hand, the stroller handle in the other. Another shopper, closer to the car, lifts his phone without saying a word, focusing on the handcuffs as Mallory snaps one around the judge's wrist. From that point on, the parking lot is both a real place and a future exhibit. Every unnecessary tug on the cuffs. Every word thrown out to justify an arrest that shouldn't have happened. Every bystander's reaction. As Mallory locks the second cuff in place, Judge Keaton inhales sharply. The metal bites too tight against his skin. "Officer Mallory," he says, steady again, "you're making a serious mistake. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights, and it is all being recorded." "Stop talking," Mallory says. "You're under arrest. You can explain yourself downtown." "For what specific crime?" the judge asks. Mallory doesn't answer him directly. He turns his head toward the nearest bystander instead, raising his voice. "For theft and refusing lawful commands," he says loudly. That's important. He isn't just talking to the judge anymore. He's talking to the people filming. He's trying to write the story out loud so it sounds reasonable later. But the facts on the tape don't match his words. There is no footage of stolen property. There is only footage of paid groceries in reusable bags. There is no refusal of clear commands before the move to handcuff. There is a jump straight from accusation to arrest. Judge Keaton doesn't pull away as Mallory starts walking him toward the patrol car. He's done this walk before, but from the other side, from the bench, watching defendants brought in wearing orange jumpsuits and chains. This time, he's the one in restraints, but his mind is still working like a judge. He notes the officer's words. Manager said, hearsay, no corroboration. Trying to steal things. No description of items, no receipts checked, no mention of a witness who actually saw a theft. Ignoring commands. Commands that were never clearly given before the threat of arrest. He notes the cameras, the fixed lens above the lot, the phones in the hands of 3, maybe 4 bystanders, the reflective surfaces of car windows catching angles the main camera doesn't see. Inside his chest, anger burns, but he holds it in place. Anger doesn't help, precision does. At the same time, he knows exactly how dangerous this moment is. Not because he expects physical harm, though he doesn't rule it out, but because he has seen what happens to people without status when this kind of officer decides to teach them a lesson. He is acutely aware of the thousands of names that pass through his courtroom with stories that began exactly like this. A vague accusation, an arrogant officer, and an arrest built on nothing. He is not afraid for himself. He is afraid that this is normal for too many people in this city. Near the front doors of the supermarket, the store manager watches through the glass. He sees the handcuffs. He sees the older man's age. He sees the phones. And suddenly the phrase he used on the phone with dispatch, "He looks like he might be stealing," doesn't feel like cheap insurance anymore. It feels like a fuse he lit without thinking. Out at the far end of the lot, a minivan slows as the driver watches Mallory push the judge into the back of the patrol car. The driver's face is tight. He shakes his head once, then drives on. The security camera records the moment the cruiser door closes. From its fixed angle, you see the judge's legs disappear into the back seat, the officer's hand on the door frame, the slight bounce of the suspension as the weight shifts. Then Mallory circles to the front of the car, gets in, and pulls away. To most people who watch it later, it looks like exactly what it is: an overconfident officer turning a baseless suspicion into an arrest. To the legal community, it will look like raw evidence of an unlawful seizure. Sitting in the back of the car, Judge Keaton stares through the smudged window at the shrinking parking lot. The cuffs bite into his wrists. His shoulders ache from being pulled back. He closes his eyes for a moment and forces himself to breathe slowly. This is not the first time he has seen a cop act like the law doesn't apply to them. But it is the first time that cop has done it to him. He catalogs everything. The initial statement, "The manager said you were trying to steal things out of the supermarket." No clarification, no details, no follow-up questions. The immediate order, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." No explanation of detention, no request for ID, no attempt to verify ownership of the car. The justification, "Ignoring my commands is enough reason for an arrest." Flatly wrong. The shout, "Stop resisting!" Spoken for the camera, not because of any actual resistance. He thinks of the cases he's presided over, where officers claimed resistance without video to back it up. He thinks of the defendants who sat in front of him with stories that sounded like this, only they didn't have phones in the crowd or a security camera overhead. He thinks of something else too, the legal tools available to someone in his position. Harold Keaton is not just going to file a complaint and hope Internal Affairs takes it seriously. That's for people who don't have the leverage he does. His mind is already moving down the path he knows this will take. Public records requests, Bodycam footage, radio logs, written reports, internal communications. He can see the outline of a civil rights lawsuit forming in his head before they even leave the lot. But that comes later. Right now, the patrol car turns out onto the main road. Sirens off, lights off. Just another unit transporting a prisoner no one at the station knows is a federal judge. In the front seat, Mallory adjusts his rearview mirror and glances back. For the first time, there's a flicker of doubt in his face. "What did you say your name was?" he asks. "Judge Harold J. Keaton," the man in cuffs replies calmly. "United States District Court." Mallory hesitates. It's a tiny pause, maybe half a second, but it's there. A split second where the reality of what he's done tries to surface and gets shoved back down. "Doesn't change anything," he mutters, more to himself than to his prisoner. He grips the steering wheel tighter and focuses on the road. He doesn't know it yet, but every second of this encounter is already out of his control. The video is recording, the witnesses are talking, and the man in his back seat is not just another uncooperative suspect. He is someone with both the knowledge and the resources to hold the entire system accountable. Later, lawyers will scroll through the footage frame by frame. City officials will sit in conference rooms while clips are projected on the wall. Reporters will freeze the exact moment the officer first puts his hands on the judge. Civil rights organizations will circulate the video as an example of how quickly suspicion can be fabricated out of nothing. And sometime after that, in a different building a few miles away from this parking lot, city leaders will read the first draft of a lawsuit that traces every step of this stop, every word of this arrest, and every policy their officer violated. They don't know it yet. Mallory doesn't know it yet. But this short, baseless arrest in a supermarket parking lot is going to cost them far more than a few minutes of paperwork. It will cost reputations. It will cost careers. And it will cost the city a very large amount of money. For now, though, all anyone can see is an older man in handcuffs, sitting in the back of a patrol car, watching the city roll by through a dirty window. He knows exactly how wrong this is, and he knows exactly what he's gonna do about it. The ride to the Crestview Police Department lasted 11 minutes, 11 routes. Minutes in which Judge Harold Keaton sat motionless in the back of the patrol car, his wrists locked in steel that had already begun biting into his skin. 11 minutes where Officer Brent Mallory rehearsed, in silence, the way he would phrase the arrest in his report. 11 minutes where every traffic light, every passing car, every bump in the road felt like part of a slow-motion unraveling of something much larger than either man realized. From the back seat, through the grate, the judge could see the side profile of Mallory's face, jaw clenched, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed forward. Officers often forgot that their prisoners could see them in reflections, the mirror, the glass, the polished screens between the console controls. Mallory looked less certain than he had in the parking lot, not panicked, not yet, but the cracks were forming. Judge Keaton watched him calmly, his breathing controlled, his voice silent. He had no intention of arguing or pleading. He had done nothing wrong. What mattered now was documentation. Every detail, every deviation from protocol, every moment where the officer failed to follow even basic procedure. This was evidence. All of it. And Judge Keaton had built an entire career on understanding the weight of evidence. The patrol car pulled into the sally port of the Crestview Police Department at 2:18 p.m. The automated gate slid closed behind them. The concrete walls swallowed the afternoon sun, replacing it with harsh fluorescent lighting that buzzed overhead. Mallory stepped out first, opening the rear door with a tug that was unnecessarily quick. "Watch your head," he said flatly. It wasn't concern, it was routine, the kind spoken without meaning. Judge Keaton stepped out with the assistance of the doorframe. His joints were sensitive, his shoulders stiff from the drive, the cuffs were unforgiving. As they walked inside, officers at the booking desk glanced up briefly. Not out of suspicion, just the habit of watching new arrivals. Most saw a well-dressed elderly man in restraints and assumed he was someone's grandfather, caught stealing medications or causing a disturbance in a pharmacy. Their expressions didn't change much, but that would soon change. The booking area smelled like disinfectant and old paperwork. A glass barrier separated the intake clerk from the holding benches. A digital clock glowed above the computer monitors. A stack of forms sat atop a printer that sputtered every few minutes. Officer Mallory guided Judge Keaton toward the yellow line on the floor designated for detainees. "Stand here," he said. The judge did. The booking clerk, Officer Carmen Vega, typed something quickly before looking up. "Name?" she asked. Before Mallory could answer for him, the judge said, "Harold J. Keaton." Vega paused, then blinked. Something in her expression shifted. Not recognition yet, but awareness. The clarity in his voice, the diction, the calmness despite being in cuffs. It didn't fit the usual pattern. "Date of birth?" she asked. "March 12th, 1949. Her typing slowed. "Officer Mallory," she said, eyes still on her monitor. "What's the charge?" "Theft," he replied quickly, "and refusal to obey lawful commands." The judge exhaled once, silently. Vega looked up again, this time with a crease between her brows. "Theft of what?" she asked. Mallory hesitated, barely half a second, but long enough for the silence to feel wrong. "Items from Crestview Market," he said. "Were the items recovered?" "There were groceries in the trunk," he said. "Store manager reported suspicious activity." "That's not an answer," Vega said under her breath, almost too soft to hear. She wasn't trying to be confrontational. She was trying to make sense of what she'd been handed. But the more she looked at the judge, his posture, his composure, his clothing, his steady gaze, the more she realized something was off. "Sir," she said carefully, "do you have identification on you?" "Yes," the judge replied. "In my wallet. The officer took it from me." Mallory stiffened. He hadn't looked at the ID yet. He had taken it, placed it in his vest pocket, and intended to examine it later, after writing enough narrative to justify the arrest. Now Vega's eyes turned to Mallory, not accusing, but questioning. "Can I see it?" she asked. Mallory pulled the wallet out reluctantly, flipped it open, and handed it over. Vega began with the driver's license, scanning the barcode, and watching the system populate the fields on her screen. Name, address, date of birth, all matched what the judge had said. Nothing unusual so far. Then she noticed there were additional cards in the identification sleeve. She pulled them out one by one. The first was a federal judiciary ID, sealed, embossed, hologrammed. Not the cheap kind, the real kind. Her stomach tightened. She reached for the next card, a federal courthouse access credential, then another, a bar association membership card, then a laminated judicial identification card used for security screening. She felt her pulse shift. She looked up slowly. "Officer Mallory," she said, her voice careful. "Did you verify this?" Mallory's jaw tightened. "I was going to," he muttered. "When?" Vega asked, failing to keep the incredulous tone out of her voice. Judge Keaton remained still, saying nothing. His eyes were focused on the far wall of the booking room, not on the officer, not on the clerk, not on the cuffs around his wrists. "Officer Mallory," Vega said again, louder now, "this is a federal judge." Her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, it was matter of fact, a statement of truth that hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. Nearby officers looked up. One stood slowly from his desk. Another paused mid-sentence while filling out a form. Conversations leaned into silence. The shift was instant. "A what?" someone said from across the room. "A federal judge," Vega repeated. Mallory swallowed hard. "No way," another officer muttered. "You're kidding." Vega pushed the credentials forward slightly, allowing Mallory and the others to see the official seal, the embedded microtext, the holographic identifiers, all features that cannot be faked by amateurs. She stood up immediately from her chair. "This needs a supervisor," she said. "Now." Lieutenant Marcus Rourke emerged from his offices within seconds, summoned by the sudden stillness in the room. A tall, graying man with 20 years on the force. Rourke had the seasoned look of someone who had seen departmental failures before and had no interest in adding another to the list. He approached the counter. "What's going on?" he asked. Vega handed him the credentials. He took them, studied them, then looked at the judge, then back at Mallory. "Explain this arrest," he said. Mallory straightened his posture, adopting a defensive rigidity. "Store manager said he was attempting to steal items," he said. "Suspect refused commands, became argumentative. I placed him under arrest." "What items?" Rourke asked. Mallory paused again. "Groceries," he said. "In his trunk." Rourke stared. "Purchased groceries or stolen groceries?" Mallory didn't answer immediately. The silence answered for him. Rourke's face didn't shift dramatically, but the tension around his jaw tightened. "Uncuff him," he said quietly. Mallory blinked. "Lieutenant, he—" "Uncuff him," Rourke repeated, louder this time. The room fell silent yet again. Several officers watched without blinking. Mallory stepped behind Judge Keaton and unlocked the shackles, the metallic clack of the release sounding louder than it should in the stillness. The moment the cuffs opened, the judge gently rotated his wrists, flexing his fingers. Red marks circled his skin. "Judge Keaton," Rourke said, taking a breath. "I'm Lieutenant Rourke. I sincerely apologize for what happened. You are not under arrest. You are free to go." "No," the judge said calmly. "I'm not leaving yet." Rourke exhaled slowly, bracing himself. "I want," the judge continued, "the incident report, the dispatch call log, the store manager's statement, the officer's body camera footage, the Sally Port entry video, and a complete digital copy of everything related to this detention." Mallory's face began to drain of color. "Sir," Rourke said carefully, "we can have those ready within a few days." "Tonight," Judge Keaton interrupted, his tone firm but measured. Rourke nodded. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of a man who had made rulings from a bench for decades, rulings that officers like him were sworn to follow. It was not a suggestion. "Understood," Rourke said. "We will get them to you." "And," the judge added, "I want the name of the store manager who reported the alleged theft." Rourke swallowed. "We'll provide that as well." Vega stepped around the counter. "Judge Keaton," she said gently, "if you'd like a seat—" "No, thank you," he replied. "I would like to remain standing." It wasn't pride, it was control. Standing meant he wasn't a detainee. Standing meant the room had shifted. Standing meant he was now the one evaluating them. Rourke turned to Mallory. "Officer," he said sharply, "my office, now." Mallory followed him stiffly, the air around him charged with panic he didn't yet know how to conceal. The door closed behind them, but their muffled voices carried faintly through the glass. Rourke's deep and controlled, Mallory's defensive and strained. Outside the office, the booking area remained almost silent. Officers exchanged glances that said more than words could. Vega watched the judge with a mix of empathy and awe. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling, he wasn't shaking. He was steady, painfully steady. If anything, the way he held himself made everything worse for Mallory, because nothing amplifies an officer's misconduct more than absolute calm from the person they targeted. After several minutes, Rourke re-emerged from his office, his expression grave. "Judge Keaton," he said formally, "we're processing the materials you requested. We will provide them in digital format." "Good," the judge said. Rourke hesitated a moment. "I want you to know," he added, "this department takes incidents like this seriously." The judge's eyes met his. "I have no doubt you will," he said, "especially after you watch the footage." There was no threat in his tone, only truth. Minutes later, the judge gathered his wallet, adjusted his overcoat, and walked toward the exit without assistance, without backup, without apology from the man who put him in cuffs. He didn't need their escort. He knew where he was going. He knew what he would do next. Outside the station, the sun was still bright. Cars still passed by. Life looked normal. But inside the building, inside the walls of the department, everyone knew nothing was normal anymore. Something irreversible had been set in motion. A federal judge had been unlawfully arrested. It was on video. It was documented. And the city had no idea yet how much it would cost them. They would find out soon enough. Because this wasn't going to disappear. This wasn't going to be handled internally. This wasn't going to be spun into a harmless misunderstanding. This was going to court. And long before the lawsuit was filed, before the news story broke, before lawyers and reporters began circling, everyone in that booking room felt the same certainty. Someone's career was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The investigation into Officer Brent Mallory's arrest of Judge Harold Keaton did not begin with a press conference, a news story, or a department memo. It began with a quiet email sent at 6:14 a.m. the morning after the incident. An internal notification from the watch commander to the deputy chief, marked with a simple subject line, "Incident review required." Attached to the email were 3 files, a clipped segment of the supermarket security camera footage, a draft version of Mallory's arrest report, and a timestamp log of corresponding radio traffic. No conclusions, no accusations, no recommendations. Just documents, placed gently on the desk of someone who understood immediately that this was not a routine review. Deputy Chief Ellis opened the first video. He watched Mallory approach the older man. He watched the accusation. He watched the lack of investigation. He watched the handcuffs. But it was the moment where the judge raised his hand toward the camera and said, "You are violating my rights." On that camera, right there, that made Ellis stop breathing for a second. Not because of the words, but because Ellis had seen that tone before. The tone of someone who knew exactly what would follow. He replayed the clip twice before forwarding it to the chief of police with a single sentence. "We have a significant problem." The chief did not need the warning. By the time he arrived at the building, 2 local reporters were already calling the department's media line asking for comment on the viral arrest video from Crestview Market. Neither used the word judge yet, neither knew the full story, but people had questions and the department did not yet have answers. Inside the building, internal affairs had already begun the early evidence gathering. They pulled the full Bodycam file and watched every second of it. They listened to the tone in Mallory's voice when he said the words, "Turn around." They listened to the rising pitch as he escalated before any crime had been articulated. They listened to the mechanical certainty with which he shouted, "Stop resisting!" at a man who had not taken one step away from him. When they compared Mallory's written statement to the footage, something became immediately clear. The 2 documents did not match. Not in tone, not in detail, not in truth. He described agitative behavior that the camera did not show. He described refusal to comply after repeated commands that had not been repeated at all. He described active resistance that simply did not exist. In a vacuum, it might have been possible to salvage the narrative, but there was no vacuum. There was a federal judge, and by midday, there was also a civil rights attorney. When the city attorney's office received the preservation notice from Judge Keaton's lawyer, they understood instantly that this case was not a minor personnel complaint. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not the kind of thing that could be resolved with a private apology or a departmental verbal counseling. This was a constitutional violation committed against someone whose professional life had been spent defining those very violations. The lawsuit had not yet been filed, but every person in the city's legal chain knew what was coming. The question was not whether a complaint would be filed. The question was what version of the footage the public would see before the department was prepared to respond. Behind closed doors, the tone of conversation shifted from procedural to tactical. Has the judge spoken to the press? No. Has he released a statement? Nothing beyond acknowledging the incident. Then we need to move quickly. They were wrong. They did not need to move quickly. They needed to move correctly. And the distinction would cost them dearly. When Internal Affairs called Officer Mallory into the first interview, he arrived wearing the armored confidence of someone who had talked himself into believing his own narrative. Officers like Mallory often believed that the report they later constructed held more weight than the video that captured the truth. They began with simple questions. What was the initial suspicion? The store manager said he was stealing. What specifically was he stealing? Groceries. Did you verify that the groceries were unpaid for? I intended to. Did you check the receipt? No. Did you ask the manager for confirmation beyond the initial statement? No. Did the suspect attempt to flee? No. Did he attempt to conceal items? No. Did he raise his voice? Yes. When? After I moved to detain him. What exactly did he say? He said he was a federal judge. And your response? I didn't care. Titles don't change commands. They let the silence sit for a moment. Then they asked the question they had been waiting to ask. Why did you shout, "Stop resisting"? Mallory hesitated. Not long, but long enough for the investigators to mark the pause in their notes. He was pulling away, Mallory said. The investigators exchanged a glance. Would you like to watch the footage with us? One asked. Mallory swallowed once. Sure, he said. They played it. Every frame, every movement, every audible word. When the moment arrived, the exact second Mallory grabbed the judge's arm and shouted the phrase, they froze the frame. Judge Keaton's body was completely still. His arms were relaxed. His shoulders were square. His posture did not reflect the slightest movement of resistance. Show me where he's pulling away, the investigator said. Mallory stared at the frozen image. He didn't speak. The investigator played the footage again, slow motion. Where is the resistance? He asked again. Mallory kept his eyes on the table. It took Internal Affairs exactly 18 days to finish the investigation. Not because the case was complicated, but because they were thorough. They reviewed 5 years of Mallory's stop and arrest data. They reviewed racial patterns in his departmental interactions. They reviewed the language he repeatedly used in his reports, the same phrases that appeared in the judge's arrest narrative. The findings were not vague. They were not ambiguous. They were not softened. They were damning. A supervisor delivered the summary to the chief in a 3-page memo. Officer Mallory detained and arrested a citizen without reasonable suspicion or probable cause. He escalated without justification. He employed command-based escalation rather than investigative questioning. He misrepresented the suspect's behavior in his written report. He utilized a verbal cue typically associated with defensive testimony, stop resisting, in the absence of resistance. His actions are inconsistent with departmental standards, constitutional policing requirements, and expected conduct. The memo ended with a line that would be quoted many times in the weeks that followed. This arrest represents a severe breach of public trust and a critical failure of judgment. Within 72 hours of receiving the memo, the chief notified the union that termination was being considered. Mallory requested representation. He got it, but representation can't fix a video. The disciplinary hearing lasted 42 minutes. He sat before a panel of senior officers, the chief and a city attorney. The footage played again. The wide shot from the security camera, the audio from Mallory's Bodycam, the synced angles from bystander phones. On the screen, every misstep, every unjustified order, every inconsistency was laid bare. When the lights came back on, the chief folded his hands. Officer Mallory, he said, do you understand the severity of what you've done? Mallory murmured something about misunderstanding, something about stress, something about the suspect acting strangely. But each explanation collapsed under the same problem. None of it appeared in the footage. The chief spoke slowly, deliberately, the way someone speaks when the decision is final, long before the words are spoken. Your actions have placed this department in an indefensible position. You have violated policy, procedure, and constitutional protections. Your credibility is compromised. Your conduct has exposed the city to substantial liability. You are hereby terminated from employment with the Crestview Police Department. Mallory's badge, ID card, and department-issued equipment were collected at the table. It was over. Except it wasn't, because termination was only the internal consequence. The external consequences were waiting in the courthouse. When the lawsuit was officially filed, it was not a short or simple document. It was 34 pages long, single-spaced, and cited dozens of cases. It outlined every constitutional violation. It embedded still images from the security footage. It quoted the officer's report line by line and compared each statement to the video evidence. It named the city, it named the department, it named Officer Mallory, it named the store manager, and it described the harm done to Judge Keaton in meticulous legal detail. It did not demand money first, it demanded accountability, but it included damages, substantial ones, as the law allowed. The city's lawyers read the complaint in silence. At the end of the first read-through, one of them closed the folder slowly and said the same words another attorney in your reference script said, "This is indefensible." Settlement discussions began. The judge did not posture, he did not make threats. He let the lawyers speak for him. The city realized quickly that there was no strategic advantage to dragging the case out. The video was clear, the written evidence was worse, and the public reaction was growing, not shrinking. 3 weeks later, the city agreed to settle. The amount, $1.3 million. No spin, no excuses. It was the largest settlement in the city's history for an unlawful arrest case. Judge Keaton accepted the settlement, but refused to personally profit from it. He directed the entire amount to civil rights organizations, groups dedicated to training, advocacy, and legal assistance for people who lacked the advantages he had. He made one public statement: "I do not require compensation. What I require is accountability. And what I hope is that this incident forces meaningful reflection on how many others experience similar violations with no camera, no witnesses, and no option to fight back." The aftermath inside the department was immediate. Mandatory retraining, policy revisions, supervisor briefings, external oversight, data audits. The city implemented reforms that mirrored those in your reference script. A comprehensive review of stop and search data by race and location, mandatory implicit bias and constitutional policing training, a Bodycam activation requirement with strict penalties, an early warning system for officers with problematic patterns, civilian oversight of internal investigations. The supermarket manager was quietly dismissed. The responding dispatch call handler was retrained. The officers who stood by silently during the booking were instructed to review their duty to intervene obligations. But none of this changed what had already happened. The footage continued to circulate online. It became training material for police academies. It appeared in legal seminars. It was included in lectures at law schools. Not because a judge was arrested, but because the arrest reflected a pattern many people experience but cannot prove. The final words of the narrator in your reference script echoed exactly what this case now represented. What happened to Harold Keaton reveals a truth many already know, that rights are only as strong as the system's willing to uphold them. And when a system fails, as it did in that parking lot, cameras, lawsuits, and accountability are the only mechanisms the public has left. This story did not end with an officer's termination or a settlement. It ended with a reminder. If this can happen to a federal judge in broad daylight, on camera, with every credential a person can possibly have, then imagine how often it happens to people with none of those protections. And imagine how rarely their stories ever reach a courtroom. If you stayed with this story to the end, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. We share these stories because they expose the failures many try to hide, and because accountability only exists when people refuse to look away.
Peering behind the glass and crossing into uncharted territory, we aim to bring you closer to the absolute truth. Step into the past to witness the exact moments that shattered expectations.